There's a specific moment you might recognize. Someone finally asks, "How are you? Really?" And instead of saying, "I'm fine," something else happens. Your throat tightens, your eyes sting, and before you've even decided to, you're telling the truth. What just happened in your brain in that exact second isn't weakness. It's one of the most well-documented physiological events in psychology, and understanding it changes how you think about every "I'm fine" you've ever said and meant to be a lie. Let's start with what "I'm fine" actually costs you, because it's not free. Psychologist James Gross, who has spent decades researching how people manage their emotions, identified a specific process called expressive suppression, the act of inhibiting outward signs of an emotion you're actually feeling. Gross's research found something striking. Suppression doesn't make the emotion go away. It just hides it from view, while the physiological experience underneath keeps running at full intensity, sometimes even higher intensity than if you'd expressed it honestly in the first place. Think about what that means. When you say, "I'm fine," while feeling anything but, you're not neutralizing the emotion. You're running two systems at once, the real one still fully active underneath, and a second manufactured one, built specifically to broadcast something different to the outside world. That second system takes energy, constant, ongoing, measurable energy. This is where the research gets concrete. Gross's studies using physiological monitoring found that people actively suppressing emotion show increased activity in the sympathetic nervous system, the same system responsible for your body's stress response. Heart rate goes up, blood pressure rises. Your body registers suppression as effort because it is effort. You are, in a very real sense, doing two jobs at once, feeling something and performing not feeling it. Now here's the part that explains why pretending they get so exhausting over time. This isn't a one-time cost. It's not like you pay the fee once and then you're fine. It's ongoing, moment to moment, every time the real feeling threatens to surface and gets pushed back down. Across a single difficult day, that's not one suppression event. That's dozens, sometimes hundreds of tiny corrections, each one small, each one adding to a cumulative physiological load that your body is quietly absorbing while your face stays composed. There's a related concept that makes this even clearer, developed by sociologist Arlie Hochschild in her influential 1983 work on what she called emotional labor. Hochschild distinguished between what she termed surface acting, changing your outward expression without changing what you actually feel, and deep acting, actually trying to shift the internal feeling itself. Surface acting, she found, is the more exhausting of the two, precisely because it creates a persistent gap between the inside and the outside that has to be maintained constantly. You're not just controlling your face, you're monitoring it, adjusting it, catching the moments it slips. This is worth sitting with. When you say, "I'm fine," you're not just choosing two words. You're committing to an ongoing performance that has to be sustained for as long as the conversation, the meeting, the family dinner, the entire day requires. And unlike physical labor, where you can see the fatigue accumulating, this kind of labor is invisible, which makes it easy to underestimate how much it's costing you until suddenly it isn't sustainable anymore. So what happens when it stops being sustainable? What happens in the moment someone asks the right question at the right time and the performance finally breaks? This is where something interesting occurs in the brain. When suppression finally releases, researchers who study emotional regulation describe something close to what's sometimes informally called an unmasking response. Neuroscientific research on emotional suppression has shown that the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for regulating and controlling emotional expression, has to work continuously to keep the suppression active. Studies using brain imaging during suppression tasks show sustained activation in these regulatory regions, essentially your brain running an active override function for as long as you keep the mask on. The moment that override stops, whether by choice or by exhaustion, the underlying emotional signal, which was never actually reduced, becomes immediately available again, often more intensely because it's arriving all at once instead of the gradual release it would have had if you'd been processing it honestly the whole time. This is why crying after finally telling someone the truth can feel like a flood rather than a trickle. It's not that the emotion suddenly got bigger. It's that you finally stopped actively pushing against something that had been building the entire time. There's a physical sensation people commonly describe in this moment, a kind of collapse, a heaviness leaving the body, sometimes described as feeling lighter almost immediately, even before the conversation about what's actually wrong has really begun. Psychologist James Pennebaker's research on expressive disclosure offers a compelling explanation for this. Starting in the 1980s, Pennebaker conducted a series of now famous studies asking people to write honestly about difficult, previously unexpressed experiences. Across these studies, he consistently found measurable improvements in both psychological and physical health markers among people who disclosed honestly compared to those who wrote about neutral, unemotional topics. Simply put, the act of putting a suppressed truth into words, even just on paper, produced a real physiological shift. Pennebaker's theory was that ongoing suppression of a significant emotional experience functions like a low-grade chronic stressor on the body, similar in some ways to any other unresolved physiological demand. When that suppression finally lifts, the body isn't just emotionally relieved. It's released from an actual biological workload it had been carrying, sometimes without you fully realizing how much weight that workload had. This reframes something important, that heaviness you feel before finally being honest, and that lightness immediately after, isn't just a metaphor. It's your nervous system responding to an actual measurable change in demand. Your body isn't being dramatic. It's accurately reporting what maintaining the performance actually cost. Here's something else worth understanding. Why the timing of this release often feels involuntary, like it happens to you, rather than something you decide to do. Suppression, as Gross's research shows, isn't infinitely sustainable. It has a threshold. Every additional stressor, every extra layer of difficulty in a day adds to the load your prefrontal regulatory system is managing. Eventually, the demand exceeds the available regulatory capacity, and the suppression fails, not because you're weak, but because the system has genuine physiological limits, the same way a muscle eventually fatigues under sustained load. This is why the breaking point so often arrives at seemingly small moments. A gentle question from someone safe, a small kindness, a moment of unexpected quiet. It's rarely the biggest trigger that causes the collapse. It's whatever moment happens to land after capacity has already been used up by everything before it. This also explains why the presence of a specific person often matters so much in that moment. Social support research consistently shows that emotional disclosure happens more readily and produces greater relief when the listener is perceived as safe, non-judgmental, and genuinely present. It's not that the truth was waiting for the right words. It's that your nervous system was waiting for a signal that release wouldn't be met with additional threat, additional performance demand, or additional judgment to manage. Once that signal arrives, the entire suppression system, which has been quietly working the whole time, finally gets permission to stand down. There's a reason this pattern shows up so consistently across different kinds of people, not just those who seem visibly overwhelmed. Even people who appear calm, composed, and easygoing can be running significant suppression without anyone, including themselves, fully registering it. Gross's broader body of research distinguishes suppression from a different strategy called reappraisal, where you actually change how you think about a situation to genuinely shift the emotion itself, rather than just hiding it. Reappraisal, Gross found, tends to be far less costly, both physiologically and psychologically. The problem is that reappraisal takes time, reflection, and often distance from the situation. In the middle of a hard week, at a family dinner, in a meeting where falling apart isn't an option, there's rarely space for that kind of processing. So suppression becomes the default, not because it's healthy, but because it's fast, and it's the only tool available in the moment. This distinction matters because it explains why some people seem to handle stress well for a long time and then suddenly don't. If you've been leaning almost entirely on suppression, without the slower work of reappraisal ever catching up, the felt experience is often one of stability right up until it isn't. There's no visible ramp, just a long flat line of composure, and then, seemingly out of nowhere, the moment it gives way. From the outside, this can look sudden or disproportionate. from the inside, and according to what the research shows physiologically, it's the predictable result of a system that's been quietly over capacity for longer than anyone realized, including the person carrying it. There's also something worth saying about why this often happens specifically with people who are safe, rather than in the moment the stressor first appeared. You might get through the actual hard conversation, the deadline, the confrontation completely composed, only to fall apart later with a friend, a partner, or even alone in the car. This isn't a delayed reaction to the original event. It's more precise than that. Your regulatory system was actively monitoring the environment the whole time, distinguishing between contexts where suppression was still required and contexts where it finally wasn't. The moment you're not being watched by anyone with the power to judge or complicate things, that monitoring can finally stand down. This is why the safest person in your life often gets to see the most honest version of your exhaustion. Not because they caused it, but because they're the first person your nervous system has deemed safe enough to stop performing in front of. It's also worth noting what this means for the people on the receiving end of someone else's "I'm fine" finally cracking. Social support research suggests that the most helpful response in that moment isn't to immediately problem solve or rush to fix what's wrong. It's simply continued presence, staying regulated and available while the other person's system finally releases what it's been holding. The relief itself does a lot of the psychological work. Your job in that moment is mostly just to be the safe condition that made the release possible in the first place. So what does this mean practically about the moments you finally stop pretending you're fine? It means that moment was never a failure of composure. It was your body's honest accounting finally being allowed to surface after running silently underneath everything else. The performance of fine was real work, measurable work, sustained by real physiological effort, and the relief you feel afterward is your system finally getting to stop paying a cost it had been quietly absorbing the entire time. This doesn't mean suppression is always wrong. Sometimes, briefly, in specific contexts, managing your outward expression is genuinely useful, even necessary. But the research is clear that suppression sustained too long, too often, without release, has a real cost, one your body keeps track of whether or not your mind is consciously counting. So the next time you feel that tightness in your throat, right before you finally say something other than "I'm fine," know what's actually happening. You're not falling apart. You're finally putting down something heavy that you've been carrying quietly the entire time. And your nervous system, which has been keeping score this whole time, is simply, finally, allowed to rest.